Holy flip! It's the horror movie fans! Oh my god! It's the FNAF fans! Ever since I saw the FNAF movie, now the FNAF fans are after me. Now the horror fans are after me. Listen, I'm just an average viewer, okay?
Did you see the Easter eggs? Did it scare you? Did you see the thing?
Okay, all right. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I think it was...
Shut up.
Actually, it's lore time, mother frick.
Freddy.
I'm gonna be straight with you. I don't have a PhD in FNAF lore, okay? All right, relax. I got like a bachelor's degree. I'm aware of most of all the lore. Could I explain it to you? Probably not. Is there anyone who can? Probably not. Not even Scott Cawthon could do that, okay? Let's be real out here. Does the FNAF movie incorporate the lore of the franchise well? There are choices made in this movie that are not gonna satisfy y'all with the freaking FNAF PhDs, okay? And I'm sure there are going to be plenty of YouTube videos longer than the movie itself explaining why this lore didn't work and why it didn't freaking do this. But if we're looking at it strictly in terms of taking an ocean of convoluted lore and putting the necessary parts into one digestible movie, then I think it did that, and I think it did it pretty well. It does a good job at getting a lot of the main ideas across. From what I can tell, this movie takes Lego pieces from a lot of the FNAF games. A little piece over here, a little piece over here, and then builds them together into this movie. It introduces the concept of the ghost children, the animatronics, William Afton, Vanessa, and the ghost children possessing the animatronics, and it does all this without any cryptic analog horror sequences, which is pretty impressive. There are also quite a few Easter eggs, which made perfect sense because the FNAF games are known for their secrets and Easter eggs and lore. Like you would hope for, this movie had plenty of moments in which I was pointing at the screen and going, oh my gosh, did you see that? Look, oh, it's the thing, it's the thing. And I also really appreciated that they seemed to honor the YouTubers who did so much for this franchise by adding a couple of them in there with some fun cameos. As a FNAF fan, there were 3 things that I needed this movie to do. Involve enough story and lore elements, but not too much to sink the ship, make the animatronics look freaking good, and make a story with characters that doesn't completely suck. And to me, I think they really accomplished all 3. The only thing I'll say is that while the movie did really involve a lot of story and lore pieces, without getting too far into the weeds, it definitely gets a little questionable towards the end, but not enough to ruin the overall integrity of the story, so I think it was pretty good. We got Jim Henson, famously known for his design of the Muppets, creating the animatronics, and he freaking nailed it. The animatronics look perfect to a T. That first scene when you see them do their little musical number just made my FNAF fan heart explode. Incredible, especially at the ending when you see the reveal of Golden Bonnie, and it's all hunched over, just slinking out of the shadows, eyes flickering in the darkness. It was perfectly unsettling. Ugh. So does this movie exist as the pinnacle example of FNAF lore translated into narrative form? No, probably not. But I certainly think it uses enough of it to do justice to the games. It portrayed the animatronics perfectly, it got across some of the key characters with varying degrees of success, and it portrayed the game's concepts in a satisfying enough way. As someone with a bachelor's degree in FNAF lore, I thought this movie was great. Okay, cool. All right, as I was saying... Get the frick out of here. It's horror time, little bitch.
Bonnie.
I am a horror fan more than I am a FNAF fan. I've only played like 2 of the games, but you better freaking believe that I watch Markiplier play every single one of them. So the FNAF series means more to me for the horror concepts and ideas that it creates rather than like the games themselves. There is so much horror potential in it, and so many people have come up with their own spin on the ideas, like through analog horror. While there are so many different kinds of haunting and possession stories, the FNAF angle is so unique. The ghosts of these children haunting these animatronics because their bodies were shoved in the suits. That's really freaking interesting stuff. And so with this movie, I was really interested to see what it was gonna be like. So how did the FNAF movie hold up as a horror movie? I thought it was just okay. Did I get you? Yeah, well, the movie didn't really either. The movie did have a difficult balance to try and make. Because the games are so drenched in jump scares, you would think that the movie would be jam-packed with them, right? But as a horror fan, jump scares are often looked down upon because they are so often cheap and very rarely executed in an earned way. So to split the difference, I was just hoping for one jump scare, one where the tension was built up and it had a great payoff. But there was none at all. Honestly, I was quite shocked. Okay, there's like 2 jump scares with Hutch Josherson when he sees like a little toy of Balloon Boy. Yeah, that was pretty fun. But they weren't like meant to be taken seriously as like real jump scares. They were more just kind of joking winks to the audience. I guess I could appreciate that they didn't go Insano style with the jump scares, but I don't know. I was just hoping for one good one. That was all. That was all. And this leads into my bigger issue with the FNAF movie as a horror movie. It just really wasn't that scary. And I know this franchise has a gigantic child audience. I'm not saying that it needs to come in here like freaking Hereditary or something. My main issue was that it really didn't have that many horror sequences. The ones that it did have were good and enjoyable, but it definitely felt like it was lacking in sequences that had that tension, that build up. I really would have loved to have seen more sequences that tapped into what the games are known for, which is that drawn out suspense from something coming after you, and then a jump scare or two. It was really interesting to think about how this game would translate the scare factor of the games into a movie. The games are mostly static. The monsters don't really move. And the scares come from seeing them in the shadows when they weren't there a second ago and knowing that they're just getting closer and closer to you. So putting that concept into a movie where the animatronics can actually move must have been a really challenging task. And so overall, even with the movement of the animatronics, I think they nailed it. But I don't know if they really captured the feeling of the scares that came from the games. What I really wish the movie did that would both honor the games and also create effective scares is what Insidious and Haunting of Hill House does. They both do this great thing where a character is interacting in a scene, but then you suddenly notice that there's like a ghost standing in the corner over there, and you almost didn't see it. Nothing happens, but it's just there, and then tension and fear builds from wondering if or when it's going to do something. And then of course there's the famous jump scare from Insidious with the red-faced man. I felt like the FNAF movie was the movie to really excel at these kind of scares. So that's why I was a little bummed when it didn't really incorporate anything like that. I'm not mad about what they do accomplish in this movie, but I just felt like it was a little lacking when there were these clear avenues in which they could take the scares. One last thing I'll say, however, is that the movie surprisingly digs deeper into some of the more gruesome concepts of like the game. Like one of the victims about to have the mask with the freaking spinning blades go straight into his face. It honestly felt like something out of Saw. I was kind of surprised. All right, is it my turn now? Yeah, all right, whatever. I think there was absolutely some good stuff in here for the FNAF fans and for the horror fans. But what about the average viewer? The average consumer? Does this movie do a good job at presenting the concepts of FNAF, creating an interesting story, and making it all accessible and fun to a new viewer? If I try to turn off the horror and FNAF fan part of my brain and try to look at this movie as someone who's heard of FNAF and who wants to see what it's all about, I also think it was okay. The concepts are certainly unique, and it's certainly not a bad movie. But did it like exceed expectations? I don't know about that. I want to stress though that that's a pretty big deal. Maybe not as much for the average viewer, but the fact that this movie is an adaptation from a video game with an insane amount of convoluted lore, and it wasn't terrible? That's pretty dang good. That is an accomplishment. I think the movie succeeds in not only putting everything into a digestible package, but also providing interesting and likable characters. I was completely surrendering to the fact that this movie would have some garbage characters, but Hutch Josherson and Abby were amazing. They were some actually really well-developed characters that I cared for. Abby is this sweet and endearing younger sister who loves her brother despite his hardships and trying to take care of her. And Mike is a very haunted older brother, faced with a really interesting tension to either spend his time and energy finding out who his younger brother's kidnapper was, or stepping up to provide a good life for his younger sister. FNAF movie, you did not need to go this hard in the character department, but I really appreciate it. Mike is convinced that the identity of his younger brother's kidnapper is lodged in his memories, and he tries to utilize lucid dreaming to see if he could dig it out. It's an extremely interesting concept, but it gets better when he lucid dreams in Freddy Fazbear's, and the ghost children appear to him in his dreams, and they tempt him with the idea that they could give him the piece of information that he wants. What? That is so good. And I really think it was an incredible way to portray the ghost children trying to communicate to Mike. The way that this was accomplished in the game was through analog horror devices. You'd play these 8-bit minigames that slowly kind of reveal to you the story, and also you'd see words and images flashing on the camera screens. But this was a really impressive way to get that same sort of thing across in a more traditional narrative context. I mean, this might be one of the only movies attempting to adapt an analog horror concept in a traditional narrative. And I think it worked pretty well. I think most of the movie's story works, but I think it kind of falls apart a little bit at the end. Vanessa is a confusing character. I think on paper she might make sense, but she does a lot of really weird things in the movie, especially towards the end. I don't know how I feel about her. My favorite moment with Vanessa is when she's building a fort with Abby and Josherson, and then the next moment she turns to him and she's like, if you ever come back here again, I'm going to shoot you. She's also just kind of a huge exposition device, so it's a little hard to take her seriously as like a character. The last act of the movie definitely falls apart more on the writing end. I think it hits some really important beats like the reveal of William Afton, the ghost children killing him inside the suit and then shutting him up in the back, which is a great setup for FNAF 3. But there are definitely a lot of logistical questions that I have in my mind. Also, for as good as Mike's setup is, I don't know if he really has a strong payoff. Ultimately, he finds that the ghosts are trying to hijack his quest for knowledge in order to get his sister. And he chooses his sister over the ghosts, promising sort of like fantasy world, like a true dream state where he can be with his brother and family again. But it just didn't really feel like Mike had a strong resolution in like choosing to let go his brother and finding that information. It also kind of seems a little confusing how like William Afton fits in the whole picture. There's a lot of questions there. In general, I think there's just like a lot of elements in the ending scene that might be kind of confusing for the average viewer. It might not all add up, and I think it might just bring up more questions than answers. Also, can we appreciate Matthew Lillard as William Afton? And the fact that he does the same thing to us that he does in Scream? Incredible. And lastly, just for funsies, I want to talk about the potential future of the FNAF cinematic universe. Just based on the box office records alone, I think there's a good chance that they're probably going to make another movie. And in the story, they kind of put the pieces in place for it. That being said, I think it would be amazing if they went straight to adapting FNAF 3. The way that FNAF 3 and 4 put a new twist on its formula while developing its ideas is masterful. And I think it would translate really well on the big screen too. Think about it. For FNAF 3, it's years after this incident. Fazbear Frights is created. It can take place around Halloween time. The same building that we saw is renovated and turned into a haunted maze. Afton is boarded up in the back, and this time around, we can see the animatronics with long since dead human body gore spilling out of the suit. Dang, that would be so good. And spooky. And beyond that, it would be awesome to see FNAF 4 adapted, which is my absolute favorite game in the franchise. The idea of playing of these like nightmare versions of the animatronics from the perspective of a child just opens up so many horror movie possibilities. It could be a really wonderful trilogy of movies, and I would not be mad if they went for it. This movie did show a lot of promise, and I think it delivered on a good amount of it too. Do not adapt FNAF 2 though. It is not necessary.
What?
Oh, but FNAF 2 must be adapted.
Yeah, it'd be
as well
really
as
scary
3
if
and
they
4.
adapted
Also,
FNAF 4,
sister
because
location.
then you got Nightmare.